Hi, I'm Taku, and I've spent over 10 years telling my stories to thousands of kids across Australia. Now, I'm making my first kids' TV show, but here's the thing. I don't have a lot of money, I've never made TV before.
Please explain.
And I've never even been to film school. Yeah, I know. It sounds ridiculous, but that's why I'm doing this podcast. You'll hear how I'm working with the best in the business, how I'm finding the money, and all the behind-the-scenes stuff no one tells you about. This is 2 Words with Taku. Let's learn this making TV thing together. All right, we're going to jump straight to where the story started to get interesting and where things started to look like, oh my gosh, maybe there's hope. So I drove 3,000 kilometers from Perth to Melbourne, literally across Australia. It took me 5 days because I had this fire to make TV and to learn about TV. This was 2 years ago in 2017 where I packed up everything I had, sold lots of my stuff, my furniture, and just decided, no, I've just got to go and chase this dream. What had happened is that I had published a children's book, and it was a children's picture book about friendship. And I had spoken in schools, libraries, I'd even taken it overseas, done a bit of a tour, and spoken to thousands of kids about friendship and essentially being comfortable in your own skin, being confident enough to tell your story, and being proud of your heritage and where you've come from. And this came out of me doing a lot of work with young people where I started to hear that something was missing. These kids didn't have role models that looked like them. These kids were feeling like they weren't enough and that they didn't belong. And I just felt like, no, I need to tell them that they're okay and they're magical and they're amazing. And part of that came from the fact that when I was growing up in the 80s as a kid in Zimbabwe, I watched cartoons from all around the world, but I also grew up watching people who looked like me on TV. So we had newsreaders who looked like me, we had game shows, music shows, dramas. There was so much stuff that, when I turned on the screen, I saw myself, but I also saw the world. And so when I came to Australia, I started to realize that's not quite the case. So kids, have to find role models elsewhere. And it honestly was not by plan or design. Somehow I ended up being this person that kids were asking for help or for inspiration. And, the schools would say, please come and talk to our kids and just tell them your story because maybe it'll help them see themselves in a better light. And so I spent almost 10 years doing that. And I loved it. And I still love it. Give me a microphone and a schoolroom of kids, I will just, I'll be in my element. But then I realized that wasn't sustainable for me. I could not physically be at every school, in every library, and TV seemed like the next logical progression to try and scale up that message of love and self-acceptance and joy, absolute joy. And so I've driven to Melbourne now, and I don't know anything about the screen industry, and I'm working full-time in an engineering company whilst writing and researching on the side. And then I joined the Australian Writers Guild because I thought, okay, if I'm going to tell stories and I want to, write these stories, let me be around other writers. And at the beginning of 2017, I created a dream board, which is something that I do every year. And on this dream board, I put the most ridiculous thing. I often put things that just seem impossible to achieve. And so when I moved, I said, okay, if I'm going to make TV, no idea how. What's the craziest thing I can think of? Oh, what if I make something that ends up on Netflix? And so I put Netflix on my dream board. And the thing that kind of tickles me or excites me is that every time I put these ridiculous things on my dream board, something happens. So let's go back to, I've joined the Writers Guild. They send out an email that there's a pitch event happening in Sydney where writers and storytellers can pitch their ideas to production companies and broadcasters. and I signed up straight away. And it meant that I had to save up a bit of money, and I had to think about, okay, how am I going to time it with my full-time work? But something said, just go to Sydney and try and pitch your idea. So that's what I did. And so that's essentially what you're going to start to hear about through this podcast, is the things that I've done where I've just felt a pull or a tug, or I'm curious, or I've tried and then doors have opened, or I've met amazing people, or I've been shown things and learned so much stuff. And my fire for doing this podcast is because I don't want my stories to be the only ones that, start to get made by people who are from voices that are underrepresented. No, I want to see more young people and more diverse voices sharing their stories. But here is the thing that I have seen, I am still living it. Just because you have an amazing story does not mean you know how to write it and package it for the screen industry, and B, does not mean that it's the right story to tell in a certain way or a certain platform. And also, it does not mean it doesn't mean that it's a story that's going to work. And the reason why I'm saying this is because I've just had to learn this on the ground, that making TV, writing good stories takes work, and it also takes skill. And a lot of these things I did not have. I've had to learn, and I am still learning them. And so this podcast is for people like me who have stories and a fire, and maybe even frustrated, like, I can't see my stories anywhere. I can't see people like me on TV, or I can't see people like me being given a chance. That is so valid, and that fire is so important. But there's the other flip side of learning how to make those stories really stand up and be competitive, and almost how to break in so people will listen. And it's hard work. So anyhow, where was I? So I go to this event, and all these broadcasters and these important people are there. I am freaking out because I have no idea what's going to happen. And then I just got in the zone and just started telling people about my idea for this show. And also I was pitching another idea, and it was great because that was the first time that I was really talking to people who had influence and people who could make a difference in terms of helping it get seen. And that's where I met John Armstrong. And so I'll tell you a little bit about John Armstrong, and I'm going to read from his official bio because then that just makes a bit more sense. John Armstrong is a screenwriter, script editor, and script producer with over 20 years' experience in creating television for younger audiences. Most recently, he was the script producer and writer for the Netflix animated series Beat Bugs, which features the music of the Beatles. And that show won the 2017 Emmy Award for Outstanding Writing in Preschool Animation, as well as the 2016 Actor Award for Best Children's Series. John has also won 3 Australian Writers Guild Awards and has been nominated 7 times. So this is the person you're going to hear from shortly. But what I want to say is that, remember how I put Netflix on my dream board? This was very unexpected. And this has been part of that whole thing of chasing things and really not being afraid to ask questions or talk to people you don't know and to learn. And so in this episode, my guest is John Armstrong, and we're going to be talking about story Bibles, pitch Bibles, series Bibles. I had an idea, but how was I going to turn that idea and package it in a way that was going to make broadcasters and production companies listen to me and pay attention to what I was trying to say? So here's John Armstrong. First question, John, how do you tell the story of how we met?
Okay, well, we met at a Writers Guild event. I can't remember the actual name of it, but it was a kind of speed dating pitch session with a whole bunch of producers and a whole bunch of writers. They sent out a general invitation to come and pitch any story ideas they had, and in between each pitch session, there were like gaps, and you could have a cup of coffee and wander around on the balcony, and there was me out there, and there was Taku out there, and we just started chatting. That's how I remember it. But maybe you have a different memory. I don't know.
I mean, that's exactly how it happens. But mine's always a bit more dramatic. It sounds so much more dramatic.
Sorry, I probably haven't told that story in a very dramatic way.
No, it's great because that is how we met. However, the backstory I'm always saying is, oh my gosh, people, I put Netflix on my dream board because I thought if I'm going to make TV, that's what I'm aiming for. And then ended up at this writers event and saw this guy, started talking to him, and what are the odds that he had worked on a kids show that was on Netflix? And then I kind of go from there. Pretty much.
Yeah. Well, I remember we were chatting, and we had actually the show which was, I think I'm allowed to say, it's Beat Bugs.
Yes, of course.
It had just won an Emmy for best writing in a preschool animation, and I remember and I was the script producer who was basically in charge of all the writing, shepherding the scripts from the original story ideas right through to final polish, and then in fact looking at cuts and doing extra lines and all that kind of stuff. I was across all of that, so it was very gratifying for us to win that Emmy. But I remember that I was chatting to you for a while, and then I brought it up, and you were like, "What?
Yes.
Why didn't you say that first up?" And I was like, "No, I felt a bit like blowing my own trumpet or something."
Yes.
And you were like, "No, you should say that immediately." So I've never been very good at selling myself, I must say.
Yes.
But that's a pretty classic writer's problem, actually. There's not many writers out there who are great at selling themselves, but hopefully we make up for it on the page.
But I think the fact that you did that is then what made me realize that I wanted to work with you or learn from you however possible, because you had that modesty. And I remember you even said, "Oh, my wife is always saying that I should tell people that." And I said, "So
that's right, she is."
Yeah. So then I thought, oh, okay, so you must know what you're doing. And then I had my kids' book there or something, and I said, "Oh, I've got this kid's story. Please, 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 can you read it? And just give me feedback, please, please, please." And you were so generous even at that point. And then here we are now.
I don't know how I found the time, because I was so busy at that point. But I really liked your energy and your optimism and your enthusiasm. And so I thought, well, I can't say I'm too busy to look at something. I have to find the time, And,
I didn't know that. Oh, John.
That's all right. Oh, well, I was actually doing two shows at once at that point, because we had Big Bugs going, and then we were developing Motown.
Yeah, I remember now. Yes.
And so I was actually across both shows, and both shows had 52 episodes at that point. They ended up having more, but so it was a lot of work. But I generally have a bit of a rule that I never say no to a new writer. I mean, I just feel like I was helped by a lot of people when I was starting out, and I feel like at this point in my career, it's important to be able to get some of those things, give back a bit, and get across some of the lessons I have learned over the last few decades working in TV, and particularly in children's. Oh. So I generally have a rule of not saying no unless there are really, really huge reasons for me to say no. And so I did say yes, and I'm so glad I did, because it worked out really well. And you were very patient. You'd send me stuff, and I'd say, I can't get back to you for another week or 2 weeks or something, and then we'd have a chat. We started sort of Skyping fairly early, didn't we?
Yeah, we did.
Just talking, because I just find face-to-face is the best way to go.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah. So that's how it all began.
Oh, and it was, yeah, it was such an incredible time because then I was so hungry to learn, and then seeing the body of work that you had, it was really, really helpful because whilst you were teaching me on one side and giving me feedback, I was also doing a lot of online learning and sort of my own research.
Right.
So trying to tie that together then with the idea that I had. And so in this episode, I wanted to focus on story Bibles and how you can go from having an idea. So I met you, I had this idea, and then we kind of sat in a room, brainstormed, and then over time we've come up with the story Bible of what this show is. So for the listeners who might not know what that is, can you tell us what is a story Bible, and then what needs to go in one?
Yeah. Okay. Well, in fact, there's a few different varieties of story Bible. There's the initial one you normally do is called a pitch Bible, and that's the Bible that you take around to try and raise money for the show, even if it's just early stage development money. So that's like a short version of the standard Bible. So first of all, we'll talk about the pitch Bible, and then we'll go into the other type of Bible. So in a pitch Bible, you're basically you're describing the show to somebody who's never seen or heard anything like this before. So they have no idea at all what you're making until this thing lands in front of them, or until you've pitched it to them and then it lands in front of them. So you have to describe kind of all of the big picture items in the show, everything from the setting to the characters to the tone to the style, and even sort of a story or two that might happen just in general terms, you know. So you're basically giving a full big picture view of the show, and because it's a pitch Bible and you're trying to actually sell the show, essentially. I mean, there's always a collision of art and commerce in TV and film, you know, and so you are, and because it's such an expensive art form, if you consider it an art form, it's one of the most expensive. It literally costs millions to do almost anything. So you're always trying to sell the show until you get a green light. So the pitch Bible is always giving how a lot of people try and describe it is you're selling the sizzle rather than the steak. You're trying to give people the impression of what this show will be like without actually telling them every single detail. And that's not because you think they'll steal it or it's more just about that you don't want to pin it down too definitively at that point, because you probably haven't got clear ideas about every single aspect of it at that point anyway, because you haven't had time to work it through, and B, you don't want to close down lines of debate about what it could be. So for instance, you might say that it's set in a certain part of Australia, for instance.
Yeah.
Now, if you said, okay, this has to be set in blah 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 street in Melbourne, which we've kind of done, by the way, but anyway.
Yeah.
But at an early stage, if you do that, then you often shut down a producer who's based in a different place who will be trying to get funding from that particular state government or whatever. And so it's just a very practical decision. You can't be absolutely specific about everything. But what you do want to do is sell the excitement, sell the originality, sell the big picture concept to them in a way that gets this other person excited. So usually a pitch document is quite short. Somewhere between 6 and 10 pages is a standard. I should preempt this by saying, like everything in TV, there are no hard and fast rules.
Yeah.
You can actually produce almost anything as a pitch document, and people have done some quite strange things as pitch documents.
Oh,
Like,
really? Like what?
oh well, like for instance, Josh Wakely, who created Beat Bugs, his
Mhm.
original pitch document looked like it was a album, looked like it was an old style record,
Oh, wow.
and yeah, because he's very creative with all of that that initial sales pitch material. He's really been thinking outside the box on that. So
Hmm.
you would get this thing in the mail, and it would be what looked like an old style record album, including having a like a picture of a record when you open it up, and a label
Oh, I
with
love
Beat Bugs written on it. So it looks like
that.
you could actually play it almost. And then you start leafing through and you get information about the show. So there you go. That's a
That's
very unusual
brilliant.
kind of, yeah, yeah.
Oh,
So
and and
you can really do anything.
and sorry, not to interrupt you, but what
Yeah,
what
yeah.
is beatbugs? Because
Well,
how do you say what beatbugs is?
Beat Bugs is a preschool animated series that's based around the music of the Beatles. And
Mm-hmm.
so he was he always knew that his big selling point was that he had the rights to the Beatles songs,
Oh,
um, and
wow.
and so that everything was predicated around that. All of the material that was sent out was always very heavily influenced by the fact that he was using the Beatles songs as to the leverage for the whole show.
Mm-hmm.
So and it
Mm-hmm.
was so that was essentially what got Netflix on board,
Mm-hmm.
and Channel 7 here and so forth. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you can do almost anything, but you do kind of have to hit some basic markers, which are, okay, what's the concept of the show, as in what's a kind of one paragraph summary of the kind of things that happen in the show. So,
Mm-hmm.
it's like friends, a bunch of 20 something friends live in adjoining apartments in New York and are trying to navigate life, love, and work together. It's something like that is your concept.
Yeah.
And then you would go, okay, who are the characters? And you just step through each of the characters, and you give probably again a paragraph or so. You can do more if you want, but you just have to be aware that you don't want to bore your audience, who in this case is a producer who's probably dealing with these kind of things, a stack of them every day, so they don't have a lot of
Mm-hmm.
time. But you
Mm-hmm.
step through the characters and give the main points of who the characters are, age, what their interests are, why they're particularly compelling characters, what their preoccupations are, what their dreams are, those kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go to like the setting. So, yeah, for example, in Friends, again, it's very important that they're in New York and they're
Mm-hmm.
in apartments that they're across the hall from each other, or at least most of them are.
Mm-hmm.
So they've got this kind of accessibility, but also this kind of stability of environment that is
Mm-hmm.
essential for making a sitcom, because sitcoms always have to have a specific place where kind of everything happens.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so then you go to the world in general, the kind of what what we see of the whole world of the show. So it's about what other places they go and what kind of community they live in and what kind of social pressures are on them, etc. It's the kind of overall environment of the show, and
Mm-hmm.
then you do something like the tone and the style. But those sort of things should be coming out throughout the pitch. Those general
Mm-hmm.
things like if it's a comedy, for instance, it like it's comedy pitch documents are almost invariably very funny to read.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, like full on comedy pictures. Like I came across one a while back for New Girl, the sitcom
Yes, I
New
do.
Girl,
Yeah.
um, and it's hilarious. Like It's
Oh, maybe I
written.
should
It's
find
written
that.
in a very
Yeah.
funny way. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's available online
Okay, I'm
actually.
gonna look for
So
it
yeah,
because that is a
um,
funny show.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and it's quite an unusual pitch document from memory in that it virtually it only has very few headings. It's just kind of rambles, but
Mm-hmm.
because it's funny, it drags you in straight away. It's like reading a kind of funny story, the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and in fact, it starts like something like, I'm probably getting this wrong, but it's something like the working title of the show is Chicks and Dicks. But obviously this isn't. But obviously this isn't France, so we're going to have to change it. It's something like that,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah, great.
And so immediately that grabs you, you know.
And that is what the show's about, though.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It
That's
is.
brilliant.
So again, actually that is a good one to look at because again that kind of breaks the mold. It's a very unusual one.
Mm-hmm.
Another one that's worth looking at, and it's around online too, is Stranger Things.
Okay, yeah.
Because what that does, their key selling point was basically the retro aspect that they were tapping into Steven Spielberg and Stephen King movies from the 80s,
Okay.
and they wanted to recreate that kind of horror, but also retro community and kids growing up in the 80s kind of feel.
Mm-hmm.
And so what they did was they have multiple references to Spielberg movies and to other Stephen King adaptations, and amongst the words, I think probably every second page from memory
Mm-hmm.
is an image from one of the movies they're using as a reference point. So there's like images from E.T., there's
Mm-hmm.
images from like a few Stephen King films like Firestarter and Carrie and those kind of movies, and so they're constantly um, they're constantly bringing you back to what their touchstone is, which is this is like a movie from the 80s, except updated to now, but with all of the things that we loved about those movies, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's it has all of the stuff that should be in a pitch document, like characters, setting, overall concept, the world, the tone, the style, and it's set out like that with the headings.
Yeah.
So it's pretty conventional in those terms,
Mm-hmm.
but in terms of the visuals, they've just been quite bold about going, no, these are our references. We're quite happy to almost be accused of plagiarism. That we're
Yeah, I was gonna
basically
say.
ripping off all of these
Mm-hmm.
shows and
Mm-hmm.
turning them into our own thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's another one that's worth looking at, and again shows you can kind of just about do anything with it.
And
So that's the pitch Bible anyway.
I was
Yeah,
gonna say, even with that one, with Stranger Things, the thing
yeah,
that jumps out at me is even the emotion around what that show feels like is the nostalgia element. And
that's right.
you got me onto watching this. I did not want to watch Stranger Things because I thought it's too ghosty, it's weird, I don't know what it is. And
But it's
then
the kids.
it's
The
the
kids, they're
kids.
such great characters, and the
Yes.
way they interact is really great. And
Yes.
the little the little love stories that go on between them are
Mm-hmm.
fantastic.
Yeah.
If you've watched the most recent series, all of that gets pushed even further. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's a great show that really, I mean, in a sense, it wouldn't have mattered whether it was retro or not. That was just their selling point,
Mm-hmm.
and then they made the character drama work as character drama, which is really what the essence of any good show
Mm-hmm.
is the dynamic between characters. So yeah,
And so, in terms of compiling a Bible
yeah.
like this, what's your approach? Because it's one thing to have
Oh,
an
okay.
idea, and
Yeah,
then
yeah.
what's
Well,
generally your approach?
if you can, if you look, this is the way I've worked over the years, which is generally in Australia, for better or worse, our shows generally are producer created rather than writer created.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that is changing. We are having a more writer created sort of industry starting to happen, but it's still more the norm that a producer, whether that be a network or whether it's a production company, come up with an idea, and then they, and the idea can be as simple as one paragraph or one page or something, and then they will bring in a whole bunch of writers to sit around and brainstorm it, and they'll develop it from there. So they'll have like a one paragraph idea, which is, well, for instance, I did a lot of writing in the early 2000s for a teen drama called Blue Water High, and the idea for that came from a former executive with Channel 9, who had this idea that she wanted to do a show that would sell well really internationally, but she wanted to be a teen drama. So she thought, what if I take the kind of the beach culture, which is a big selling point to Europe and America and everywhere else in the world about Australia. So if you take the beach culture and you then weld it to a kind of teen high school drama, and she was originally thinking about really quite hard hitting things like Degrassi, Junior High, and all those kind of things. So if you do that, if you put like a kind of and to make sure it was beach oriented, they made it all revolve around surfing. So you had a surf school on the beach, literally on the beach, but you had a bunch of elite kids brought to this school because they were showing promise, and then you had all of the teen drama that comes with throwing a bunch of kids together, or teenagers together in a house, and to some extent pitting them against each other. So that was her idea. It was as simple as that. And then she brought in a bunch of writers. I wasn't in the first bunch, actually. One of the writers who was there, who really, virtually took over the show, was a wonderful writer called Shelley Burse, who is currently working on a stand drama that she created called The Commons, and prior to that she did The Code for the ABC, which she created. So she came in and she really took on board the whole concept, but really fleshed it out in a very strong way, and she created the initial Bible for that show, I think in collaboration with a couple of other writers. So that's kind of the standard way that it works. You get, like we did on your show or on our show, that you had an idea that was quite simple and really could have expressed it in less than a paragraph. And then we went into a room for 2 or 3 days. I can't remember how long it was. And we talked it through and worked out what we thought had legs, what we thought had drama, what we thought had juice, who were interesting characters, what was an interesting setting, what was an interesting overall arc for the show, like in terms of where it started and where it finished. And then out of that, you went away and wrote the initial pitch Bible.
Which was how many pages?
Oh my God, it was so long.
Yes.
And it was full of spreadsheets.
I know.
Actually, that's the only Bible I've ever written that was full of spreadsheets. That wasn't your unique take on the Bible.
Hey, it works though.
It did work. Yeah, it did work. My eyes did kind of glaze over by spreadsheet number 20 though. But
And just to explain to the listeners, my process was I had all these characters and all these questions about them. What was the quickest way to answer them? And in fact, I'd written down that I was going to ask you how much is too much to put in a Bible, and now
I don't think you ever asked me that.
Yeah, it was a lot, and I think
it was great though, because we had so much to work with then. It was actually really good, and I know I ribbed you mercilessly for it, but we did have so much then to work with, and then to cut down, and it gave us so much to react to too. We could look at things and go, well, is that working? Okay, great if it is, but if it's not, then what can we do differently, rather than starting with a blank page kind of thing. So then we kind of jointly got together and did the final version, didn't we? I think I had a big hand in writing the stories, and so we ended up with something which was the concept, the characters, the setting, the world, tone and style, and then just, I think, sort of, were they half pages maybe, or shorter on each of six stories, I think. They were just very, very simply written, so that people got the gist of what kind of show it was. Often producers really want to see story ideas. That's because no matter how many times you go through the kind of characters and setting and tone and style, you don't really know what a show's about until you embark on a story and you look at how that story works, and then you kind of go, oh, okay, I get it. It's all about this. So that's your pitch Bible.
Yeah, and even going back to the whole thing around story, I don't think I appreciated how important that was, because I've come from architecture world and everything's very visual, and so I had all the graphics and images to show you what was in my head, but then the words are just as important. And going back to all those Excel spreadsheets, it's because I didn't quite know how to write a short paragraph or so of what I was trying to say. So it was also good at writing experience or writing challenge to now whittle that down into the format that that the broadcasters or the producers or whatever will read. No one's going to read my Excel spreadsheets. That is a fact. Right. It's a fact.
But also it's a very good exercise, and I mean, we are doing it mostly at this point just to sell the show and get some development money or whatever. But it's also a really good exercise for getting it straight in your own head, what the show is, because you need to just keep whittling it down, and it's one of those things where it's like that. There's some famous quote from some writer who said, I wrote you a long letter because I didn't have time to write you a shorter one, and that's so true.
I like that.
I can't remember who said that, but
I'll
somebody
find out.
did.
Yeah.
And it is that thing about simplicity is often the most difficult and the most time-consuming thing to come up with.
Yes.
And that's what you really need to strive for when you're doing these documents, is simplicity. I've been to a couple of classes with there's a great writer called John Colley, who worked with Peter Weir and various other people writing movies, and his philosophy, which I endorse completely, is that you need to try and make kind of 90% of your story development happen on short documents, not on the script itself, so that you actually are really fully across every part of the story in a very short document. For movies, he's talking about something that's kind of less than 20 pages of writing, and for TV, if you're talking about a half-hour drama, then I think it needs to be something that's only 2 or 3 pages. Because that's when you really can come to grips with what's working and what isn't in the big picture. And once you actually start scripting and getting into dialogue and scenes, and it blows out to however many pages it's going to be, then it's much harder to see the big picture and see what's working in overall terms. And you become attached to things like pieces of dialogue or character moments that
Yes, so
you don't want to
true.
leave behind,
Yes.
whereas if you're just working in a short document, that doesn't happen. So it's definitely a good process to go through working up a pitch document, even just for yourself.
Yeah. You know what I'm finding so fascinating right now is talking to you like this in an interview context and then looking back at what we have done and how that's happened in coming up with our show and our Bible. It's like, oh, I'm just having these moments of, duh, of course. Oh, yeah, but of course. Whereas in the moment, I couldn't always understand that or see that. But it makes so much sense.
Yeah, you came from, a very different background. And honestly, you picked up all of this stuff so fast. It was astonishing. And I didn't realize you were actually like doing some other sort of background research and, working away on training yourself in other ways as well. That was feeding into this because really you went from 0 to 100 in a much shorter period than most writers would. You were just picking up everything I was saying very, very quickly. But it's a different mindset, and it's only when you've worked in television, for a few years that you kind of get it. And I know when I first started working in TV, I didn't really get it at all. I mean, I started as a jobbing writer on episodic TV, and so you don't get across the big picture. You only know the story that you've been handed to make work.
Yeah.
And so it's much easier, I think, or maybe not easier, but it's much better to start out like you've started out, where you've been across the whole show and seeing how the whole process works rather than just being given this one little element to make work. So you now understand how the whole thing works. And I think that's really helpful. It's going to be helpful for you in producing this as well, that you've been across the big picture.
I think so as well. And it also helps when I'm now talking to other writers who we want to invite in that, this is what we're trying to do. Because I think it would feel weird to just get a little piece of the puzzle, just a little hint and not know everything. Because then, like you said, the tone of what we're trying to do, the feel, the authentic vibe, all of that is sort of embedded into everything, really, even the team. And in fact, that's one thing I wanted to touch on with the Story Bible is that I've had to include the team that I'm working with as well as part of pitching this show and saying,
that's right. That's right. Yeah, I should have included that. There's always something about the personnel. That's usually right at the back, unless it's a huge selling point. I mean, like Beat Bugs, for instance. Well, we had the Beatles song, so of course that was right up front. But yeah, normally the people involved, the actual talent, you leave that to the last page and you say, we're going to have this writer, this director, this producer, whatever, and give their credentials, because that can be a strong selling point, of course, as well.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, you already know this because we've talked about this, but I think having you on board has been a huge help as well, because now I've got the story and the idea, and we've co-created this show, but you've got the experience. So then when I've been talking to people about the show, and even the fact that we got development funding and when talking to broadcasters has been because now it's a super tag team, and I felt good about that as well, that I'm not doing this by myself, and I'm
I think it's a good way to work when I mean, specifically the aims of the show are to bring some new voices out in this space in TV, and and so where you're basically having new writers for every episode, writers who don't have a lot of credentials, if any, in TV, then I think it is good to have some old guy like me, who's been around and who can actually be the kind of hopefully a bit of a mentor to the whole group, to and also just simply to be good at the nuts and bolts of getting a show to air, because there's a lot of stuff that you again only learn as from experience about what's going to work and what isn't going to work, and what's possible to do and what's virtually impossible to do. But by the same token, it's great to have people who aren't aware of those things, who can push the boundaries a bit and say, well, as you have said many times, kind of, well, why can't we do this, or why can't we go there to look for funding, or why can't, and so you've come up with sort of stuff that I would never have thought of. And I have to kind of take a step back and go, well, I've never been in a show that's done that, but does it really mean it can't be done? That, and I think that's a really good thing for both of us, for me to be challenged that way, and for you to have somebody who can actually turn around at some point and say, no, that's a really dumb idea.
Yeah.
Like spreadsheets.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I will never live that down. I really agree with that. And that's part of what I'm also trying to encourage some of the other writers that I'm now working with, or who are approaching me to say, oh my gosh, how did you do this? And part of that is around the relationships that you want to form as you're creating the show, but also who you want to learn from. So I knew I am green, but I have a fire. I love story. I want to learn. And so that's, I think, has really helped even just our relationship, like working together, is that I'm learning from you, but I feel like you always saying, oh, I'm learning from you too. And so it's
absolutely, that's so true. I'm really learning.
It's a joy. It's actually, we're having fun. And then that's what we're trying to encourage as the show goes forward.
Absolutely. Now, do you want me to just mention, because that's definitely a pitch Bible, which is generally a shorter document. There is also a thing which can either be called a series Bible, or some people call it a writer's Bible. And that's the thing which we've actually also created as well, which is a much longer version that fleshes out those stories, fleshes out the characters more, and gives some sort of pretty firm parameters to the writers coming on board about what kind of thing they need to be writing for the show. And so that often isn't something that gets shown to producers at an early stage anyway. The producers might want to see it later on once the show gets running. But at an early stage, it's too much detail really to shove down their throats. You want them to just get the essence of the show. And so this becomes more important once the show's in production, and sometimes it can change while the show's in production. You often come on board a show that has a very extensive initial Bible, and then as you start writing, it changes because certain things don't work, or a broadcaster says they don't like that in a particular character or in a particular storyline, so it has to change. So sometimes you can get to the end of the show and you can look back at the Bible and go, wow, it's not really that anymore. It's a different show, and hopefully it's better. It's not always the case though. It can evolve quite dramatically sometimes. But that's more of what we call a series Bible or a writer's Bible, and so it's a longer, more detailed, more nuts and bolts kind of document.
And I think, I like that we are talking about the series Bible, because then that one, for example, things like, episode outlines.
Yes,
you can't
all of
just
that.
nut that out in 5 seconds. That is
No, you need
actually
time.
time
Yeah.
and even a collaborative thing. I thought, oh yeah, I could just whip out a couple of things, but it's everything, like
No.
knowing overall what the show arc is
Yeah.
doing, and then what each character's,
Yeah.
it's an art
Yeah,
form.
that's the thing about TV, is extremely collaborative.
Mm-hmm.
And we virtually never just write an episode and that's what goes to air, like write a first draft. That's not how it works.
Yeah.
And people who do work like that, like the kind of icons of the industry, like Aaron Sorkin and David E. Kelly, and those people who reputedly just write an episode and it goes straight to air. When you actually dig deeper, you usually find out there's been a whole process behind that. Like I remember hearing from one of the writers on West Wing that although Aaron Sorkin takes sole credit, and I hope I can't be sued here, that he actually employed on West Wing a number of writers to go and research and write the 5 or 6 different strands in each episode of West Wing, so that he'd have like 5 different writers writing 5 different strands, and so they would just write their own bit, and then he would put all those bits together and often use the story almost as they'd come up with, but managed to integrate them and also basically rewrite every single line of dialogue himself.
Wow.
So it had that Aaron Sorkin quality, which is really quite identifiable. So even though he was writing the show from beginning to end, and it was just his draft was basically going straight to air. It was actually a whole process before that. So and that collaborative process doesn't usually work like that, but that collaborative process is what makes good television, because it's not just one person's voice. It's actually a whole lot of people who are putting their own talent into it, but also hopefully keeping true. And this is the difficulty in TV. It's great that it's collaborative, but the difficulty in TV is keeping it on track, on style, within the concept, the original concept, sort of. So there's a single vision of the show. There has to be a single vision of the show, even though there's all these different people writing for it. So, and that's where the script editor or script producer or a creative producer comes along and really guides that show, or showrunner, as they call them in the US, and it's happening more here, where really guides the scripts all the way through the process, so that when it gets onto screen, you have something that feels consistent all the way through, that doesn't go up and down depending on who's writing which episode.
Yeah, and that's such a good point to end in terms of this first chat, because that's what you've helped do with this show. That is your role,
scripting.
Script producer, script editor, and then that keeping that overall voice, tone, everything, and making sure that it's consistent. And again, I didn't understand what that role meant or was before I came into this, but now that's important, because I'm not going to be able to write every episode. I don't want to, but then now I trust you enough that, he knows exactly what we're trying to do, that when you're now working with other writers, that will be, a big part of what comes out of that.
But also, of course, you will be having input into
yes, I will,
script all the way through.
Yes.
But hopefully I'll be enough across everything to be able to do the rewrites on the episodes, and hopefully not. Hopefully they won't be too extensive, because we will have brought those writers up to speed in the process.
Yes, indeed. That is so perfect because we're definitely going to record another episode talking about then the actual writing of scripts and the life of a script from idea to on the screen. So I think for this episode, thank you so much for even all this wisdom and insight and the laughs. And we will definitely be chatting to you again soon, John. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Taki.
You're listening to 2 Words with Taku. If you like what you're hearing, please rate, review, and recommend the show.
And that's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed listening to John and I laugh a lot. In fact, I feel like that's what we do all the time. And it's the best thing because he's just so kind and generous, and I feel so comfortable asking him questions, and he's so patient with me. And so, yeah, I hope you get a sense of the vibe that we have. This is, the person who's helping me run our writer's room, and we're having lots of fun. And I would really love to hear from you if you have questions or feedback about this episode or anything else that I'm talking about, because we're still looking to connect with other writers and storytellers who are wanting a break or who have things that they want to share or try. And so, yeah, please send me an email. I'm at taku@taku.com.au. I'd love to hear from you. And I'll also put all my social media links in the show notes, as well as links to John's stuff. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed the episode, and we will see you in the next one.